The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard, as Catherine stood by the tall windows of their private quarters. Her fingers traced the cold glass while she watched the gardeners tend to the rose bushes below. These were the same roses she had planted 3 years ago, when they first moved into their wing of the palace. Back then, everything felt permanent, hopeful, filled with endless possibilities. William entered the room quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick Persian carpet. He had been up since dawn, making phone calls and finalizing arrangements that neither of them wanted to discuss. The weight of recent events hung heavy between them like an invisible wall. For weeks now, they had been dancing around the inevitable conversation, both knowing what needed to be said but neither willing to be the first to speak the words aloud. The palace felt different these days. Staff members whispered in corners, their usual cheerful greetings replaced with sympathetic nods and awkward silences. The media circus outside the gates had grown more intense with each passing day, photographers camping out with telephoto lenses, hoping to catch a glimpse of any emotion that might betray the couple's private struggles. Catherine finally turned from the window, her blue eyes meeting William's across the room. They had been married for 12 years, together for nearly 20, and yet in this moment they felt like strangers navigating uncharted territory. The fairy tale that the world had watched unfold was now facing its greatest test, and the pressure was suffocating. William approached slowly, his hands clasped behind his back in that familiar gesture he used when deep in thought. They had always been able to communicate without words, understanding each other's thoughts with just a glance or a touch. But now even their silent language felt broken, interrupted by the gravity of what lay ahead. The children were at school, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their parents' lives. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been their anchor through everything, their laughter filling the halls and their innocent questions, forcing both parents to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But even the children had begun to notice the tension, asking why Mama looked so sad and why Papa spent so many hours locked away in his study. Catherine moved to the small sitting area where they often shared their morning tea, a ritual that had become sacred to them over the years. The antique settee held so many memories of quiet conversations, shared dreams, and whispered confessions. Today it would witness something entirely different. She sat down gracefully, her posture perfect despite the chaos in her heart. Years of royal training having taught her to maintain composure even when everything was falling apart. William joined her, leaving just enough space between them that their knees didn't touch. The small distance spoke volumes about where they stood. He cleared his throat softly, then looked down at his hands. They were hands that had worn a wedding ring for over a decade, hands that had held his children as they took their first steps, hands that had comforted Catherine through her darkest moments. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the words they couldn't bring themselves to say. Outside, life continued as normal. The sounds of London traffic filtered through the windows. Delivery trucks rumbled past the gates and tourists gathered hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty. But inside this room, time seemed suspended, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Catherine reached for the delicate china teacup that sat untouched on the table beside her. Her movements were measured, deliberate, giving her something to focus on other than the crushing weight in her chest. The tea had grown cold hours ago, but she lifted it to her lips anyway, tasting nothing but the bitterness of what was to come. William finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. The words that came were not the ones either of them expected, but they opened the floodgates to a conversation that would change everything. They spoke of duty and love, of sacrifice and the impossible choices that came with their positions. Each word was carefully chosen, as if they were walking through a minefield where one wrong step could destroy whatever hope remained. As the morning wore on, the reality of their situation became crystal clear. There would be no fairy tale ending, no magical solution to make everything right again. Sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome the obstacles that life presented, and sometimes the greatest act of love was knowing when to let go. The afternoon brought no relief from the emotional storm that had been brewing all morning. Catherine found herself in the nursery, surrounded by the toys and memories of their children's early years. The rocking horse that William had insisted on buying before George was even born sat in the corner, its paint slightly faded from years of use. Each item in the room told a story of happier times when their biggest worry was whether Charlotte would sleep through the night or if Louis had eaten enough vegetables at dinner. William appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the entrance as he watched his wife run her fingers along the edge of the crib that had held all three of their babies. They had spent countless hours in this room during those precious early months, taking turns with midnight feedings and diaper changes, working as a team in the way that had always come naturally to them. Those were simpler times when their love felt unshakable, and their future seemed written in stone. The conversation they had started that morning continued without words. They both understood that this room, with all its innocent joy and pure love, represented everything they were about to lose. The children would be fine, they told themselves. Children were resilient, adaptable, able to find happiness even in difficult circumstances. But the thought of explaining this to George, Charlotte, and Louis felt impossible. Catherine picked up a small stuffed elephant that Louis had been inseparable from during his toddler years. The fabric was soft and worn from countless nights of being clutched tight during thunderstorms and bad dreams. She remembered how William would creep into Louis's room after particularly difficult days, just to watch his youngest son sleep peacefully, finding solace in the child's innocent breathing. The weight of their decision was crushing, but they both knew it was the only path forward. The constant media scrutiny had taken its toll, but it was deeper than that. The fundamental differences in how they envisioned their future had grown too wide to bridge. William's commitment to modernizing the monarchy often clashed with Catherine's desire for privacy and normalcy for their children. What had once been productive discussions had become painful arguments that left them both exhausted and resentful. William moved into the room, his footsteps careful and quiet on the plush carpet. He joined Catherine beside the toy chest, where photographs of family holidays and birthday parties were displayed on a small shelf. There was the picture from their last Christmas together, all five of them laughing as they attempted to build a snowman in the palace gardens. George's hat was crooked, Charlotte was mid-giggle, and Louis was trying to eat a piece of snow. They looked like any normal family in that moment, unburdened by titles or expectations. They spent the next hour going through the children's belongings together, making decisions about what would go where. It was a practical conversation wrapped in heartbreak, discussing custody arrangements and school schedules while surrounded by the remnants of the life they had built together. Catherine would take the children to her family's estate in Berkshire during school holidays, while William would maintain his residence at the palace for his royal duties. The logistics were complicated, but they worked through each detail with the same methodical approach they had used for every major decision in their marriage. They had always been good at planning, at thinking through consequences and preparing for every possibility. Neither had planned for this possibility, though. No amount of preparation could have readied them for the day they would sit in their children's nursery and divide up their lives. As evening approached, the golden light streaming through the windows began to fade. Soon the children would return from school, full of stories about their day and eager for dinner and bedtime stories. For tonight, everything would appear normal. They would maintain the facade of happiness for just a little longer, giving themselves and their children one final evening as a complete family. Catherine folded a tiny sweater that Charlotte had outgrown but that she couldn't bear to donate. William organized the books on the shelf, his hands lingering on the story collections they had read aloud hundreds of times. These small acts of tidying felt like preparing for a journey, ensuring everything was in order before they stepped into an uncertain future. Neither spoke about the media statement that would need to be prepared or the meetings with lawyers that lay ahead. Tonight was about this room, these memories, and the quiet acknowledgement that some chapters of life must end for new ones to begin. They were learning that sometimes the most profound love requires the most difficult choices, and that walking away doesn't always mean giving up. The children returned home that evening with their usual burst of energy and chatter. George rushed through the door first, his school blazer askew and his backpack trailing behind him. Charlotte followed close behind, already launching into an animated story about her art project, while Louis bounded in last, his face smudged with what appeared to be chocolate from an afternoon snack. Catherine knelt down to greet them, forcing her brightest smile as she listened to their overlapping stories about teachers and friends and playground adventures. William appeared moments later, scooping Louis into his arms and asking George about his mathematics test. To any observer, they looked like the perfect family unit they had always strived to be. But beneath the surface, both parents felt the crushing weight of pretense. Dinner was served in the smaller family dining room, away from the formal grandeur of the state rooms. This had always been their sanctuary, the place where royal protocol gave way to messy family meals and silly conversations. Tonight, Catherine watched her children eat their favorite pasta dish while chattering about their plans for the upcoming school holiday. William helped Charlotte cut her food while answering George's endless questions about airplanes and space exploration. The normalcy was both comforting and heartbreaking. These were the moments Catherine had treasured most about their life together. The simple, everyday interactions that made them feel like any other family despite their extraordinary circumstances. She memorized the way Louis giggled when William made funny faces, how Charlotte insisted on using her special fork with the princess handle, and how George tried to sit up straighter when discussing serious topics like a proper young prince. After dinner, they moved to the family sitting room for their evening routine. The children spread their homework across the coffee table while Catherine and William helped with reading and arithmetic problems. The familiar chaos of school bags, pencils, and worksheets created a comfortable backdrop for what they all knew would be one of their last normal evenings together. Though the children remained blissfully unaware, William sat cross-legged on the floor, reviewing George's history assignment about British monarchs throughout the centuries. The irony wasn't lost on either parent as their eldest son enthusiastically discussed the importance of duty and service to the crown. Catherine helped Charlotte practice her spelling words, marveling at her daughter's determination to get every letter perfect, while Louis curled up beside them with his favorite picture book. As bedtime approached, they followed their established ritual with careful precision. Baths were drawn, teeth were brushed, and pajamas were selected with the same attention to detail they had maintained for years. Catherine read Charlotte a story about a brave princess who learned that sometimes courage meant making difficult choices, while William helped the boys with their nighttime routine in the adjoining room. The tucking-in process took longer than usual, though neither parent acknowledged why. Catherine lingered beside Charlotte's bed, smoothing her daughter's hair and listening to her prayers with unusual attention to every word. In the boys' room, William sat on the edge of George's bed longer than normal, discussing the next day's plans and making promises about weekend activities they both hoped he could keep. Louis, in his sweet innocence, asked why Mama and Papa seemed so quiet today. William's throat tightened as he assured his youngest that sometimes grown-ups needed time to think about important things, but that he was loved more than all the stars in the sky. The little boy accepted this explanation with the trust that only children possess, snuggling deeper into his covers with a satisfied smile. Once the children were finally asleep, Catherine and William found themselves alone again in their bedroom. The space felt vast and cold despite the warm furnishings and familiar photographs that lined the dresser. They moved around each other like polite strangers, completing their nighttime routines in silence, each lost in thoughts too heavy to share. Catherine sat at her dressing table, removing her jewelry piece by piece. Each item held memories. The earrings William had given her for their 5th anniversary, the necklace that had belonged to his grandmother, the simple wedding band that had never left her finger until tonight. William stood at the window, still dressed in his day clothes, staring out at the gardens where they had spent so many happy mornings with the children. The weight of tomorrow pressed down on them both. Soon they would have to tell the children, hold family meetings, and begin the process of restructuring their lives. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of their shared space, they allowed themselves to grieve for what they were losing and to find peace with what they were choosing to preserve. The next morning arrived with an unusual stillness that seemed to acknowledge the gravity of what lay ahead. Catherine woke before dawn, her body refusing to rest despite her exhaustion. She found herself in the kitchen preparing breakfast with mechanical precision, each movement deliberate and careful. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air, creating an atmosphere of false comfort that she desperately needed to maintain. William joined her soon after, his hair still disheveled from a restless night's sleep. They worked together in their familiar dance of morning preparation, him setting the table while she finished cooking the children's favorite breakfast. Neither mentioned the conversation that awaited them, or the phone calls that would need to be made afterward. For now, they focused on creating one last perfect morning for their family. The children appeared one by one, rubbing sleepy eyes and gravitating toward the warmth of the kitchen. Louis climbed onto his special chair, requesting extra jam on his toast while Charlotte carefully arranged her place-setting just so. George, ever the responsible oldest child, asked about the day's schedule and whether he would need his football kit for after-school practice. Catherine and William exchanged a meaningful look across the breakfast table. They had decided the night before that they would tell the children together, after school, when there would be no rush to get ready or worry about being late for classes. It seemed important to give the children a normal school day, surrounded by friends and routine before their world changed forever. The morning proceeded with its usual gentle chaos. Backpacks were packed, lunchboxes were filled, and last-minute searches were conducted for missing shoes and forgotten homework. Catherine helped Charlotte with her hair ribbons while William reviewed George's spelling words one final time. Louis announced to anyone who would listen that he had dreamed about flying elephants, launching into an elaborate description that made everyone smile despite the heaviness in their parents' hearts. As the time came to leave for school, Catherine knelt down to hug each child goodbye. She held them a little longer than usual, breathing in their sweet scent and memorizing the feel of their small arms around her neck. William did the same, his large hands gentle as he adjusted their uniforms and reminded them to be kind to their classmates and listen to their teachers. The drive to school was filled with chatter from the back seat as the children discussed their plans for playtime and shared excitement about an upcoming school assembly. Catherine watched them in the rearview mirror, noting how George helped Louis with his seatbelt and how Charlotte shared her morning snack without being asked. These small acts of sibling love gave her hope that they would support each other through whatever lay ahead. After dropping the children off, Catherine and William drove back to the palace in relative silence. Both were lost in thought, preparing themselves for the difficult conversations that would soon follow. They had agreed to speak with their closest advisors first, then the children's teachers, and finally the children themselves. Each step felt monumental, as if they were crossing bridges that could never be rebuilt. Back at the palace, they spent the morning in William's study, surrounded by legal documents and phone calls that would set their new reality in motion. The conversations were professional and necessary, but each detail felt like another small cut to their hearts. Custody arrangements, financial settlements, and public relations strategies were discussed with clinical efficiency, reducing their love story to a series of legal negotiations. Catherine found herself staring at the family photographs that lined the walls of William's study. There was their engagement photo, both of them glowing with happiness and hope for the future. Their wedding picture showed them laughing as they left the cathedral, surrounded by cheering crowds and falling rose petals. Holiday photos captured moments of pure joy, beach vacations, Christmas mornings, quiet afternoons in the garden. The hardest part was not the legal complexities or even the media circus that would inevitably follow. The hardest part was reconciling the love they still felt for each other, with the reality that love alone wasn't enough to bridge the growing distance between them. They had tried counseling, long conversations, and compromise after compromise, but sometimes two people could love each other deeply and still be incompatible in fundamental ways. By afternoon, they had completed most of the necessary arrangements. The children would continue their current school, splitting their time between the palace and Catherine's family estate. Holidays would be shared, birthdays would be celebrated together when possible, and both parents committed to presenting a united front in all decisions regarding their children's welfare. As the school day drew to a close, both parents prepared themselves for the most difficult conversation of their lives. They had practiced what they would say, how they would explain their decision in terms the children could understand. But no amount of preparation could fully ready them for the moment when they would have to look into their children's innocent eyes and explain that their family would never be the same. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the family sitting room as Catherine arranged the furniture in their most comfortable configuration. She had chosen this room carefully. It was where they had shared countless family moments, where the children felt safe and loved, where difficult conversations had always been met with honesty and gentle guidance. Today would require all of her strength and William's wisdom combined. William returned from his final phone call with their family solicitor, his face drawn but resolved. They had agreed that honesty, delivered with love and reassurance, was the only way forward. The children deserved to hear the truth from their parents rather than whispered rumors from staff or, worse, sensationalized stories in the media that would inevitably surface in the coming weeks. The sound of the school car pulling up the driveway sent both parents to the window. They watched as their 3 children climbed out, George helping Louis with his heavy backpack while Charlotte skipped ahead, her school dress swishing around her legs. For a moment, Catherine and William stood side by side, united in their love for these beautiful souls they had created together, drawing strength from this shared purpose that would continue long after everything else had changed. The children burst through the door with their usual afternoon energy, eager to share the highlights of their school day. George announced that he had been chosen to represent his class in the upcoming debate competition. Charlotte proudly displayed a gold star on her mathematics worksheet, and Louis excitedly described the butterfly that had landed on his nose during outdoor playtime. Catherine suggested they all gather in the sitting room for a special family talk, her voice carefully calibrated to sound interested rather than serious. The children settled onto the large sofa, with Louis immediately curling up against his father while Charlotte and George flanked their mother on either side. The physical closeness felt precious and fragile, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. William began by telling the children how proud he and their mother were of them, how they had grown into kind, intelligent, and caring individuals who brought joy to everyone around them. He spoke about the importance of family and how love could take many different forms, sometimes requiring difficult decisions that might be hard to understand at first. Catherine took over, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She explained that sometimes, even when people love each other very much, they discover that they might be happier living in different places while still being the best parents they could possibly be. She assured them that nothing they had done had caused this decision, that some things in the grown-up world were complicated in ways that had nothing to do with children. The questions came slowly at first. George, with his serious demeanor and thoughtful nature, wanted to know if this meant they were getting divorced like his friend Harry's parents. Charlotte wondered if she would still be able to have birthday parties with both Mama and Papa present. Louis, in his innocent way, asked if this meant he would get 2 bedrooms and twice as many toys. Each question was answered with patience and care. Yes, they would be getting divorced, but they would always be a family, just arranged differently. Yes, birthdays and holidays would still be celebrated together whenever possible. And while Louis might indeed have bedrooms in 2 different houses, the most important thing was that he would always have parents who loved him completely. Catherine explained that she would be spending more time at Grandmama and Grandpapa Middleton's house in the country, where there would be more space to run and play, and where the children could have normal adventures without photographers following them around. William would remain at the palace for his royal duties, but the children would spend lots of time with him there too, continuing their lessons in protocol and history that would prepare them for their future roles. The children's reactions varied according to their personalities. George asked practical questions about school and friends, wanting to ensure that his routine would remain as stable as possible. Charlotte worried about her pony and whether she would still be able to visit the stables regularly. Louis seemed primarily concerned about whether his stuffed animals could travel between houses with him. As the conversation progressed, Catherine and William found themselves marveling at their children's resilience and emotional intelligence. While there were tears and confusion, there was also an underlying trust in their parents' love and wisdom that made the difficult discussion bearable. The children seemed to understand in their own way that this decision was being made with their best interests at heart. The evening that followed was both heartbreaking and beautiful. They ordered pizza, a rare treat that usually required special occasions, and watched the children's favorite movie together on the sofa. Catherine and William sat at opposite ends, with their 3 children nestled between them, creating a bridge of love that connected them despite the physical distance that would soon become their new normal. As bedtime approached, both parents participated in the usual routine with extra attention and care. Stories were read, prayers were said, and extra hugs were given freely. The children seemed to sense that something significant had shifted, but the foundation of love and security that their parents had built remained solid beneath them. The following weeks blurred together in a haze of practical arrangements and emotional adjustments. Catherine found herself packing boxes with the methodical precision of someone trying to hold herself together through sheer force of will. Each item she wrapped told a story. The china they had received as wedding gifts, the artwork they had chosen together for their first home, the books they had read to each other during lazy Sunday mornings before children filled their lives with beautiful chaos. William threw himself into his royal duties with renewed intensity, accepting more engagements and spending longer hours in meetings with his advisors. The public appearances continued as normal, with both of them maintaining the composed facade they had perfected over years of royal training. But those who knew them well could see the subtle changes. The way Catherine's smile seemed to require more effort, the slight tension in William's shoulders during formal photographs. The children adapted with the remarkable flexibility that young people possess. George approached the transition with his characteristic seriousness, creating detailed schedules in his notebook to track which parent would be where and when. Charlotte threw herself into her art projects with increased passion, creating paintings and drawings that she proudly announced were for both houses. Louis, perhaps too young to fully grasp the permanence of the changes, treated the whole situation like an extended adventure. The media speculation had begun almost immediately. Despite their efforts to keep the proceedings private, photographers camped outside both the palace and the Middleton family estate, hoping to capture images that might reveal the emotional toll of their separation. Catherine learned to time her movements carefully, using side entrances and covered cars to protect both herself and the children from the constant scrutiny. Their legal teams worked diligently to finalize the arrangements while maintaining discretion. The financial settlements were complex but fair, ensuring that Catherine would have complete independence while providing security for the children's future. The custody arrangement was crafted with input from child psychologists and education specialists, prioritizing stability and emotional well-being above all other considerations. The hardest moments came unexpectedly. Catherine would find herself crying while sorting through old photo albums, remembering the dreams they had shared and the plans they had made together. William struggled with quiet evening hours at the palace, the spaces that had once been filled with family noise now echoing with his solitary footsteps. They both discovered that grief for a living relationship carried its own unique pain. Friends and family rallied around them with love and support, though everyone struggled to know what to say or do. Catherine's parents welcomed her and the children with open arms, transforming their country home into a place of refuge and healing. William's father offered his own form of support, sharing the wisdom that came from his own experiences with divorce and the challenges of balancing personal happiness with royal duty. The children's adjustment period brought its own challenges and revelations. Charlotte began having occasional nightmares, seeking comfort from whichever parent was available in the middle of the night. George asked increasingly sophisticated questions about marriage and commitment, forcing both parents to examine their own beliefs and values. Louis continued to navigate between houses with cheerful adaptability, though he occasionally asked when everyone would live together again. Catherine and William discovered that co-parenting required new skills and deeper communication than their marriage had ever demanded. They had to learn to separate their personal feelings from their shared responsibility as parents, finding ways to support each other's relationships with the children while maintaining appropriate boundaries in their own interactions. The formal announcement, when it finally came, was handled with the dignity and grace that the public had come to expect from them. The statement was brief and respectful, acknowledging the end of their marriage while emphasizing their continued commitment to their children and their respective roles within the royal family. The public reaction was immediate and intense, with overwhelming support mixed with expressions of sadness from people around the world who had followed their love story for decades. On the last night before Catherine's official move to the country house, she and William sat together in their former bedroom, surrounded by boxes and the remnants of their shared life. The conversation was quiet and reflective, filled with gratitude for the beautiful years they had shared, and acknowledgement of the growth they had both experienced. Even through this painful transition, they talked about the children's future, their hopes and dreams for each one, and their commitment to maintaining a united front in all parenting decisions. They discussed practical matters like holiday schedules and school events, but underneath the logistics lay a deeper understanding that they would always be connected through their shared love for George, Charlotte, and Louis. The final morning arrived with an unusual clarity, as if the universe had decided to offer them perfect weather for their most difficult goodbye. Catherine stood in the doorway of what had been their bedroom for the last time, taking in details she wanted to remember forever. The way the morning light fell across the antique dresser, the view of the gardens where they had shared countless conversations, the comfortable chair where William used to read while she got ready for evening events. The children moved through their morning routine with practiced efficiency, now comfortable with the rhythm of spending weekdays with Catherine in the country and weekends with William at the palace. Their adaptability continued to amaze both parents, though occasional moments of confusion or sadness reminded everyone that healing would take time. William loaded the last of Catherine's personal belongings into the car himself, refusing assistance from the staff who had offered to help. Each box represented a piece of their shared history that she was taking with her, creating a new chapter while honoring what they had built together. He handled her possessions with the same care he had always shown, a gesture of respect that spoke to the love that remained beneath their practical decision. The goodbye itself was remarkably simple. There were no dramatic speeches or tearful declarations, just two people who had loved each other deeply, acknowledging that their journey together had reached its natural conclusion. They embraced briefly, a gesture that felt both familiar and strange, filled with years of shared memories and acceptance of their separate futures. Catherine knelt down to hug each child one more time before they left for school. George, ever the responsible eldest, reminded her to text when she arrived safely at the new house. Charlotte pressed a small drawing into her mother's hands, a picture of their family with hearts floating above each figure. Louis wrapped his arms around her neck with the fierce love that only small children can express, whispering that he would miss her until tomorrow when they would be together again. The drive away from the palace felt both endless and too short. Catherine found herself memorizing details she had taken for granted during her years as a resident, the way the gates looked from the inside, the faces of the guards who had protected her family, the familiar streets that had been the backdrop to so much of their life together. When she finally looked in the rearview mirror, the palace was just a distant silhouette against the London sky. The country house welcomed her with warmth and possibility. Her parents had prepared everything with loving attention, creating spaces where the children would feel immediately at home, while giving Catherine the privacy and peace she needed to heal and rediscover herself. The gardens were bursting with spring flowers, and she could already envision afternoons spent reading under the old oak tree, while the children played nearby. In the weeks that followed, both Catherine and William began to find their rhythm in this new arrangement. The children flourished in their dual environments, enjoying country adventures with their mother and continuing their royal education with their father. Birthday parties and school events were attended by both parents, who discovered they could support each other as co-parents in ways that had eluded them as spouses. Catherine threw herself into charitable work with renewed passion, focusing on causes that had always been close to her heart, but that she now had more freedom to pursue. William embraced his role as a single father during his custody time, learning to braid Charlotte's hair and help with homework in ways that deepened his connection with all three children. The public gradually adjusted to this new reality, seeing both Catherine and William thrive in their individual roles while maintaining their dignity and commitment to their children. Photo opportunities now captured two people who, while no longer married, remained united in their dedication to their family and their respective contributions to society. Months later, as Catherine sat in her garden watching the children play while William arrived for Louis's birthday celebration, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The love story that had captured the world's imagination had not ended in the traditional sense. It had evolved into something different but equally profound. They had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to transform a relationship, rather than force it to continue in a form that no longer serves anyone involved. Their silent farewell had moved millions to tears not because it represented failure, but because it demonstrated that even fairy tale endings could be rewritten with grace, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to the well-being of those we love most. In choosing to end their marriage, William and Catherine had chosen to preserve their family in the most authentic way possible, proving that love takes many forms and that sometimes the most difficult decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes.